Hey, happy Thanksgiving Eve. We are here with you tonight for another Bayley Body live show, as we are every Wednesday at 7 o'clock Central Time. So tonight we have a really interesting topic, and it's something that was suggested to us from one of our followers who emailed us some questions. So we decided this is a really good topic that we can cover as a whole show topic. So we're talking about intermittent fasting tonight.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about, what is intermittent fasting firstly. For a lot of people, they may not even know what that is. So we'll kind of define it for you. We'll tell you the different styles that there are out there that, have become better, well-known and used. We'll tell you our personal experience on it because we've both used it for ourselves and for some of our clients in the past. We'll tell you, the things that we've found have been positive about it, the things that we've found were probably setbacks or, not necessarily optimal. So then you can figure out if it's going to work for you or not. I think that's going to be the main thing, is understanding that there's no right or wrong method or answer to this. It's about weighing up the options and figuring out, is this something that I want to try? Is this something that could help me with my fat loss, improve my digestion, improve my brain function or my clarity, mental clarity, and things like that. So do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so let's start with, like you mentioned, what is intermittent fasting and what does that even mean? If you're kind of in the bodybuilding field or if you just play around in the gym, then you've probably heard this as like a buzzword. But if not, if you're just like a housewife, stay-at-home mom, or you're not really into the bodybuilding type of training, then you may not have heard of intermittent fasting before. And what it is basically just a strategy of using fasting, which means not eating anything or drinking anything other than water, but using it intermittently. So short periods of fasting at intermittent times. So you have some periods where you're eating normally, some periods where you're not eating anything at all. And it's been shown to be pretty beneficial for fat loss. I think one of the biggest questions is whether or not it is appropriate for muscle building or for bodybuilders to use, even if they're trying to lose a little bit of fat. A lot of times I think bodybuilders, especially the guys, are afraid of using fasting because they're afraid of losing muscle. So that's another thing that we'll talk about tonight. But yeah, so that's it. In general, it's using short periods of fasting where you're not eating or drinking anything except water in order to get a certain response out of your body.
Yeah. I mean, essentially you're either in a fed state or you're in a fasted state. Fed state meaning that you've got food in your digestive system. Fasted state meaning that you have nothing in there. If you go get a blood test or you need to go to the doctors for something and they say, I want you to do this blood test in a fasted state, that means you don't eat anything that morning. You go. So essentially your fasted state is while you're sleeping. Most people actually have a degree of fasting in their lifestyle, and it's usually from the time you go to sleep, if you're not getting up in the middle of the night to eat cookies and ice cream and stuff like that, through the time you go to sleep, through the time that you wake up. That's usually what most people's fasted period is. So it might be from 9 or 10 p.m. through to 6 or 7 a.m. is a fasted state, and then a fed state is from your first meal all the way through to the point that you go to bed, and essentially your digestion, is out, everything's cleared out of your system. So that's fed and fasted state. So I think it's important to understand that first, because everyone does it to a degree. But in terms of, like Lauren was saying, enhancing, whether it's good for fat loss, good for digestive health, gut health, good for cognitive function, so how your energy levels and things like that. We'll talk about those three things, I think, in a little bit more detail. But firstly, understand that there's more than one way to do intermittent fasting. There's actually quite a few different ways. There's one I know that is essentially where one day of the week, so it's usually on like a Sunday, I think, on one day of the week, you don't eat anything for 24 hours. So you eat your normal food, 6 days of the week, you have your normal routine, and then on Sunday, you don't eat anything, you just consume water. And, people might say, well, is that healthy? Is that safe? The reality is, yes. I mean, we come from an evolution where our bodies weren't eating every day. We weren't able to get, go to the store and just get food. We were basically having to survive on things that we found. So we weren't really eating every single day. So understand that, yes, from a biological perspective, it's not going to be, detrimental to your health having one 24-hour period a week where you don't eat. And there's other ones where you may not eat till lunchtime. So it's like a 16-hour fast with an 8-hour window. So think 24 hours in the day, 16 hours where you don't eat, 8 hours where you do eat. So essentially it's from about 12 p.m. So your first meal might be lunchtime, and then you eat through to 8 p.m. at night, or you may even eat till 6 p.m. and press your window down. So there's different strategies. It may just be pushing your first meal, your breakfast meal, back a few hours in the morning to 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 12 p.m. And that is fasting. That is essentially a tool. You may not even understand it, and you may be using it, and that is essentially a dietary tool that we use.
Yeah, and I think it is important to become aware, because if you are kind of doing it but not really intentionally, and you don't really know that you're doing it, then you could be doing it in a way that might be detrimental to you.
Yeah.
So the whole idea as to why people would intentionally use intermittent fasting is, like I said, to increase fat loss. And the reason why this does work is just that you have the intermittent fasting means that you're doing short periods of fasting. So it's much different than starving yourself, or even from calorie restriction. Calorie restriction is like your most common way of dieting, where you're just restricting back the amount of calories that you allow your body to have. But that's in a constant, like over a long period of time, and consistently day to day, you're calorie restricting. Whereas intermittent fasting, some days you may have a regular calorie consumption, and then some days are lower calorie consumption. And I think that one of the greatest benefits that I found when using it, and that I just believe is good for everyone's body, is that intermittent fasting gives you a time where you're not in a fed state. You don't have food constantly being digested in your system. It kind of gives your body a chance to relax, to reset, to repair cells, and repair muscle, and do lots of other things, cellular regeneration, and things that need to happen within your body, without constantly using blood and energy to the stomach to always be digesting food. So I think it's a great practice to do it every so often, even if it's once a month or once a week. You just do a 24-hour fast, and it gives your body some rest from digesting, and gives it a time to focus on some other bodily systems that need to happen.
Yeah, and I think that Lauren touched on an important thing to remember, is that fasting is not calorie restriction per se. So a lot of women, especially women, will not only not eat for long periods of time, but they'll just consume really low calorie diets as well. That is a combination for all kinds of yo-yo dieting, binge eating, bad mental relationships with food. It's a recipe for disaster. So understand that intermittent fasting isn't about reducing down the amount of food you're eating. You're still going to eat those 3 meals. So say, for example, you don't eat till lunchtime. You would still have your breakfast meal at lunchtime, and then you would have your lunchtime meal at like maybe 3 or 4 p.m., and then you would have your dinner meal at 7 or 8 p.m. So you're still consuming the 3 meals. You're just condensing down the window. One of the things I do find with men versus women, though, is that women tend to struggle getting all that food in the smaller window. So you do have to be aware, is your window big enough that you're able to get in enough nutrients to fuel your body in a healthy way? Most men don't have a problem. They can put back a lot of food in a short amount of time, and they might hit their calorie intake for the day in 1 or 2, 3 meals. Some women, you know what I mean? So for women, it's a lot harder to maybe hit that caloric intake in that small window. So you have to just make sure that your window, so when I'm saying a window, I'm talking about the period of time during the day where you are eating. So you choose that window. So if you're eating right now and you're getting up in the morning and you're having breakfast at 7 or 8 a.m., try pushing it back. You try shifting your diet around. So, if you're having that breakfast meal, push it back to 10 a.m. or push it back to 12. See how you feel on it. You may find that you have to work up to 12. You may want to start at, pushing it back to 10 a.m. and start there. And that way you're getting a few hours in the morning where there's nothing in your system and your adrenaline is elevated, which is going to trigger fat burning, and your insulin levels are balanced and they're stable, which is going to coincide with fat burning. As soon as you start eating the food and the insulin goes up and down, it's going to start blunting your adrenaline, and that's going to blunt your fat burning capability.
Yeah, and that's, leading up to something that I wanted to mention is that fasting lowers your insulin levels. It makes you become more insulin sensitive over time. So I think it's a really good practice because most of us are insulin resistant, and we're constantly, our bodies are constantly having to produce insulin to clear out all of the sugar that we're putting into our bodies. So by fasting, it lowers your insulin levels and it increases your fat burning or your lipolytic hormone responses. So it increases things like your growth hormone and glucagon and some of those other things that are important for fat burning. So that's, anytime your insulin is low, you're going to be more in a fat burning state. Anytime those other fat burning hormones are high, and also, like I mentioned, growth hormone is one of those. So growth hormone is actually high during intermittent fasting. And these are, results that you're going to get with kind of a specific window. So I always recommend to people that if you're going to do intermittent fasting, I say that the shortest fast that you should do would be 16 hours. And not that you can't do anything less than that. Like, for example, when you're sleeping and, from the time between dinner and breakfast, you might be 12 hours. Well, that's a fast, I guess. But most of those hormone responses that I'm mentioning that are really beneficial for fat burning and for keeping your lean muscle tissue, that usually happens at about a 16-hour mark. And then, the best hormone responses usually come between like 20 to 24 hours of fasting. So I think your benefits of fasting as far as hormone responses go really drop off if you go less than 16 hours. So I personally recommend anywhere from 16 to 24 hours. And I think you can even go longer. You can go up to 36 hours. You can even go 72 hours before your metabolism will start to slow down. And this has been, proven in studies, which is another good point, because a lot of people, when they're hesitant about intermittent fasting, they say, well, I've always been told that if I want to lose weight, that I have to eat, 6 small meals a day to keep my metabolism high. And that's really just a myth. It doesn't, I think the idea behind that is just like the thermic effect of food and digestion. But whether you're eating that food in 2 meals or if you're eating it in 6 meals, it's the same amount of energy as long as you're taking in the same amount of calories in those windows. But typically for guys, I think can go into longer fasts. For women, I don't recommend very long fasts, at least not often. Maybe if you wanted to do like a 48-hour fast for like spiritual or mental reasons, do that, once or twice a year, but don't do it often, because women, our pages are falling off of our bookshelf over here. Women have a much more sensitive hormone response. So our hormones and things that are going on inside of our body do require more energy, more consistent energy consumption. And when you go for really long fasts, then it starts to mess with the female hormones, whereas men don't experience that quite as much.
Yeah, and I mean, Lauren's talking about the beginning spectrum and the very end. I mean, going to like a 48 or 72-hour fast is at the very extreme end of it, and that, I wouldn't even do that myself. There are people that we know who do that, and they find that it really helps them. For me, I would find that my energy levels would suffer through that. So I know my personal preference. Lauren would go longer than me. She understands what works for her. So it's really about figuring out, trying it, testing it, seeing what works for you, and figuring out how you're feeling. And what I guess I would suggest is that to start somewhere, like Lauren was saying, start at like the 16-hour mark. So that would be, if you stop eating at 8 p.m. at night, you don't eat till 10 a.m. the next morning. Would that be right?
I can't do math in my head.
Yeah, no, 16 hours. Yeah, so you wouldn't eat till 12. I mean, that's a test, and it doesn't mean that you have to do it every single day. You could do it you could do it twice a week if you want. You could do it once a week to begin with to get used to it. what you'll find is that the initial stages of it will be challenging because you may be insulin resistant, and you may find that you start craving foods, and that you have this. A lot of people have a grazing mentality. They just kind of grab food periodically through the day and don't really even think about what they're eating when they're eating it. Fasting makes you very aware of when you're eating. It makes you very, alert to the fact that you're grazing or you're in a fasted state, so therefore everything is off the table.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not exactly, you have to be strategic with it in the sense that it's not always the most user-friendly way of dieting. Say you were going out with people and you had to have breakfast with family or something like, but you're in a fasted state, it's not exactly optimal because it doesn't really leave you any options. So in that sense, you don't have to do it every single day, but incorporating it. And I'll give you an example, like Lauren and myself, especially for me, I probably did it for about a year straight, where I wouldn't eat till about 12 o'clock, about lunchtime every day. So I would get up at 5 or 6 a.m. I would go work out, and then I would eat at about anywhere from 11 to 12 p.m. And I definitely found that it helped reduce body fat, definitely. And I would still eat the same amount of calories. So don't forget that. Don't forget that, I wasn't really restricting down the amount of food I was eating because I was trying to preserve as much muscle mass as I could. I didn't want to lose muscle mass. So that was the main thing. And I found that it did help me get quite lean. But at the same time, it didn't help in terms of building muscle or anything like that. Even if I was eating more, I found it challenging to build more muscle, but I was able to get leaner doing it.
Yeah, I really believe that, like I mentioned before, bodybuilders are kind of scared of losing muscle while they're doing intermittent fasting. But I think that it's a really good method for fat loss, especially for guys and especially for bodybuilders. But you just have to remember that when you're doing this, it's fat loss phase. You're not in a muscle building phase. I don't think that intermittent fasting is the best way to achieve muscle building, and I don't think there are many people that would argue with that. So I think that intermittent fasting is a really good tool for bodybuilders, though, because it gives you really good fat loss without sacrificing muscle tissue. And that's because, like I mentioned earlier, of the growth hormone response that you get during fasting. So your growth hormone is actually increasing, and so that helps to preserve your lean muscle tissue while those fat burning hormones are higher. And then, so let's go and just talk about, you've already kind of mentioned different days that you can fast and then different times. So I want to talk about those two things real quick. As far as the days go, if intermittent fasting was something that you wanted to try, there are lots of different schedules. Some people do a style of fasting where they will have, 5 days, basically Monday through Friday, where they eat normally, and then on Saturday and Sunday they will do intermittent fasting. Or some people will do one 24-hour fast every week. The rest of the time they're eating normally. I think a good way, if you're a beginner and you want to try intermittent fasting, I think alternate day fasting is the best way to do it. And alternate day intermittent fasting, I should say, because you're not actually going to fast for an entire day, which is something I wanted to mention. When we say, for example, a 24-hour fast, it doesn't mean that the day of Monday you don't eat anything all day. 24-hour fast can mean from noon in one day till noon of the next day. So each day you might have one meal, or even 3 meals within a 2-hour feeding window. But the hours is what counts from hour to hour mark. So it's not like an entire day you're going without eating. So I think that's a good way to start if you're looking to try it, would be eat completely normally on one day, then the next day do an intermittent fasting where maybe you have a 6-hour feeding window. So 6 hours where you have all of your meals, and then the rest of the day you're fasting. And repeat that every other day. So one day is normal, one day is intermittent fasting. And then change up or try out different schedules as far as the hours that you're fasting. So like I mentioned, I recommend at least 16 hours if you want to get the hormone response of fasting. So that would be 16 hours of fasting, 8-hour feeding window, which is really a lot of time to get all your meals in. Then the next thing you could do would be like 18 and 6. So 18 hours fasting, 6 hours feeding,
20 and
and
4.
then 20 and 4. So 20 hours fasting and 4-hour feeding window.
Yeah. And I think, like Lauren was saying, play around with that. So figure out what, not only what type of windows that you want to have, but what time of the day do you want them to start happening. So, say, for example, if you're someone that has their dinner relatively early, 6 p.m., you could stop your, you could strategically plan it for 5:30, so your window closes at 6 p.m. And then that way, you can start eating earlier the next day. If you're someone who, gets hungry at nighttime, and if you don't eat enough before you go to bed, that you're up all night craving, have it a little bit later. But then that means you just have to wait a little bit longer the next day before you can open your window up and start eating again.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I don't think fasting doesn't have to be the same for everyone. So, some people may fast through the morning and then start eating at noon and then eat till 6 or 8 o'clock at night. Some people, actually, I found that I did pretty well doing just the opposite. So I ate breakfast and then I ate through, sometimes I would, start my eating window at like 7 a.m. and then I would just cut it off at like 2 or 3 p.m. and then I wouldn't eat in the evening.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was so much of a hormonal thing or, a physiological thing. I think it was more for me, my eating patterns. I would tend to go off plan and eat junk foods later in the day. Yeah. Whereas at the beginning of the day, when your willpower is still high and your motivation is strong, you can, stay on cue and you can eat the good foods that you want to have. And so that's how I was. So eating earlier in the day, I was able to really stick to the healthy foods I wanted to eat. And then by fasting at night, it was like, I'm not eating anything. Yeah. So I didn't have that option to go graze or munch on bad
You can't weigh up the best option. You can't say, well, I could have this chicken and broccoli, or I could have this tub of ice cream. You just know that everything is essentially off limits for that time period. And it definitely it takes out the decision-making process, that when your willpower is low, your decision-making power is going to be dramatically impaired. So I think that's an important thing to realize, is that, it helps you eliminate decision-making. And that's a huge part of that's a huge part of what, where people come undone, is that they have too many decisions to make. They get overwhelmed, so they just make the most natural decision to them. So think of the most natural decision to you. Is it going to be grabbing the fast food, grabbing the microwave dinner, grabbing the most easiest thing you can find, as opposed to having essentially no options on the table and just knowing that you have to just push through. Yeah. So it's really good for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And on the flip side of that, the benefits to fasting in the morning is that when you're in that fasted state, and if you can work out in the morning and train in the morning, then I think you get a lot of fat burning benefits from that. So I think that is enhanced with fasting in the morning, but that's when you just got to do what's right for you. So if you're more disciplined, if you're like a bodybuilder and you're training in the morning, you want to get the best fat burning for your buck, and you know that you can stay consistent and clean the rest of the day, you're not really working with an emotional eating issue or anything like that, then maybe the morning's better. And that kind of leads into, I think, the difference, again, between men and women that we notice when we use this with our clients and ourselves. For men, I think it's really good for the fat burning effects. For women, I think the biggest benefit that we get is more of the emotional eating. It really, like Fraser was mentioning, it takes the decision making out of things. It really forces you to think about when you're actually hungry and when you're just eating out of habit or boredom or procrastination, stress, any of those things. I think it really kind of turns the tables on that, and you have to start noticing when your body's actually hungry and when you're just eating out of habit.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the things that we notice, is that, and this is not to say that all people fit this category on each side, but, a lot of men seem to handle this style very well, in the sense that it's good for the fat burning. And they are less emotional eaters. There are some male emotional eaters, don't get me wrong, but there are less. And they just eat for essentially because they're hungry. Because we're hungry. That's essentially, it's like, we're hungry, we're just going to eat. Women, on the other hand, there tends to be more of a psychological, emotional dynamic with food, and that, that is a conduit for you out there to essentially numb numb yourself from pain and from challenges. So we found that these were really good tools. But in saying that, your doctor might say to you, you should be eating, like Lauren was saying earlier, you should be eating every 2 to 3 hours. You want to stoke your metabolism. Like, you hear that term very often. And, the doctor might talk about managing your blood sugar. So, we want to eat consistently through the day so your blood sugar doesn't get too low, and then, you start craving, and you basically go after some junk food to get the blood sugar back up again. And a lot of that is just, like Lauren was saying, old science that, has since been proven false in terms of, when eating more meals through the day, there's no sort of effect on stoking the metabolism per se. If you want to stoke your metabolism, working out and being physically active, moving your muscles is how you stoke your metabolism. It's got nothing to do with the frequency of your meals. You could have a day, or you could have 10 a day, and as long as you're eating the same amount of calories and the same amount of nutrients together, you're going to yield a very similar result. And this is especially for beginners. I'm not saying that you'll yield the same result if you're like a pro bodybuilder or a fitness model, but you will yield a very similar result if you're a beginner, or you're just relatively intermediate, or you just need to lose some body fat, period. So then that's a very important thing to be aware of. And also understand that, if your doctor talks about you having to eat more consistently, or blood sugar levels, what you'll actually find is that when you are in a fasted state, your body has stored sugar. So your body has stored sugar in your organs. It has stored sugar in your muscles, and through your liver, it's going to break down sugar and essentially release that into your bloodstream while you are not eating. So your body's very good at maintaining your blood sugar levels to a point where you are healthy and you're functional, and that's its job. So you're actually essentially giving your hormones in your body a chance to actually do the role it was designed to do, which is what most people don't do. Like Lauren was saying, most people will eat all day. They'll never give their body a chance to not be digesting food. So there's so much blood in their digestive system. Their insulin being constantly pumped out. So then you're never actually allowing your system to properly clear out.
Yeah, definitely. And then I did want to, we're getting close to time. So we did have one specific question from someone who was using intermittent fasting already. And they were saying they are currently intermittent fasting with an eating window of 5 to 6 hours, but they don't know if they should take their protein in the morning or wait until I break my fast around 2 to 3 p.m. This person is working out about 5 to 6 days a week. So before I get into the question, I do want to also mention, because this made me think about it, training 5 to 6 days a week. I do recommend that you train if you're intermittent fasting, just because always recommend training, of course.
Your appetite.
Yeah, but it also, like I mentioned, with your hormones and things that are happening, your fat burning hormones are increased. So it's your body will start, if you're doing everything right, will start to break down its stored body fat, and it breaks down into fatty acids, which then is circulating in your blood. If you're not training, you're not going to burn off as much of that fatty acids. You're not going to use it as energy. So do make sure that you're training. So this person is fasting until about 2 or 3 p.m. and I'm assuming then he's eating all of his evening meals then. So he's asking, should he take protein in the morning or wait until his feeding window? And maybe, I don't know if we'll give the same answer on this or not. I would say do not take the protein in the morning, because if it's protein, that's essentially going to be breaking your fast.
Is he working out in the morning, or is he?
He doesn't say if he's working out in the morning or at evening.
Yeah.
So that could. I
would assume that he's probably working out in the morning if he asked that.
Yeah.
Which in that case, you would just supplement your training with branched chain amino acids instead.
That's what I was going to suggest, is to just use branched chain amino acids. That won't really break your fast, as opposed to a protein powder that has other ingredients in it. You know, it also may have some carbs, has sweeteners, and just other components that are in the ingredients list of that.
And what I would suggest for you to do is, you know, finish eating a little bit earlier at nighttime and pull your window back a little bit. So, you know, if you're training in the morning, you don't want to be going like 6 or 7, 8 hours without eating. You do want to have your meal reasonably close to your window, reasonably close. Otherwise, that could be detrimental on your muscle. So what you want to do is pull that window back. So I would take it anywhere from 11 to 12 p.m. and just finish eating a little bit earlier at nighttime instead. And that way, if you're training in the morning, you've only got, you know, 3-4 hours before you eat, instead of, you know, 5 or 6, 7 hours before you eat, which is probably, that is quite a big window. And I would say that even if you're supplementing with amino acids, you could potentially still start breaking down muscle mass if you've trained that early in the morning. So
I would definitely recommend the same thing, to try to push your feeding window back slightly. Typically, you know, from what I've found in just research, is that 2 hours after your workout is kind of like your optimal window to really be taking in a lot of nutrients. So if the closer that you can get, it doesn't have to be immediately after. Like, you don't have to bring Tupperwares with you to the gym and be stuffing your face. Like, your muscles are not going to need it in that very second, or it's going to atrophy. Dystrophy. So it just, you know, it depends on when you're working out, when you're training, when you're eating. All of these things you want to take into consideration when you're doing intermittent fasting, for sure.
And the last thing that I wanted to touch on was, I said, you know, in the post on Facebook and stuff, that we would just give a few tips for Thanksgiving for everyone, because I know that some of you tuning in tonight will be, you know, having Thanksgiving. People in New Zealand and Australia won't be, but you can apply this to any special occasion where you're going to be eating off plan. So, you know, just off the top of my head, I thought I'd throw it out there, help you right now. Think of this as, even if this is just beyond Thanksgiving, this could be any day where there's a special occasion where you're going to eat off the plan. You know, make sure that you get a workout in tomorrow morning. That's the first thing. You know, very often what people will do is, on these types of days, they will be ultra sedentary. So they'll just be sitting there from the morning eating all day. Get that workout in first thing in the morning, no matter what. You want to fuel your body, empty the sugar out of your body by working out. So when you consume more sugar, it's going to fill up those empty storage tanks. Stay super hydrated, drink a lot of water. Very often when you're eating off the plan, the last thing you want to think about is consuming water, but very often when you're dehydrated, you're going to crave more and you're going to want to eat more of those bad foods. So you can very often start out eating them and you'll just keep eating them through the craving hormones that are just getting fired off because you're dehydrated. And I think Lauren talked about even doing some juice later in the day. So whether you have a juicer or a NutriBullet, or you have access to making some kind of juice, have that at the end of the day. Finish your day with some healthy nutrients. It's kind of like, one is like a mental reset. You get to start over again and kind of close that chapter. And two, it's a hormonal reset for your body as well. And what was the last tip that you gave in the Awesome Life Advocate? I know there was another one. It was about not being a food weirdo. And what Lauren was saying is that very often when you're on a diet or when you're trying to lose body fat, you're one of two people. You'll either be a food weirdo and you won't want to touch anything there and you'll bring all your own stuff, or you'll be the opposite and you'll sit at the table parked up all day and just gorge. Now, and people are very polar with their approach. They'll either be way down this end or they'll be way down that end. And there's going to be, like, you know, very few people in the middle. Be one of those people in the middle that has a balance of the two. So understand that, yeah, fat loss is important. Yeah, you might be on a diet per se, but you know, these occasions, your birthday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, things like that with your family are important. Have those foods that people prepare for you. You know, understand that it's just food. It's not going to be the be all and the end all. It's not going to be the downfall of your goal and your vision. You can incorporate it into your life and make it work. But at the same time, don't just kind of resign yourself to the fact that December is going to be the worst month of the year for me. I'm probably going to put on 10 or 15 pounds. So I'm just going to gorge myself. And then come January, I'm going to try and lose it all. Don't go take that mindset either, because those extreme mindsets bring nothing but, very unstable results in an unstable life. So find that middle ground.
Yeah, enjoy the holidays, or else you're just going to feel deprived, and it's going to make for more crazy emotional eating.
Yeah.
But, Christmas doesn't last the month of December. So really, and stay clean, eat, healthy, real foods most of the time. And then on Christmas Day, have whatever the heck you want.
On that day,
Yeah, that's how we do it, is that we stick to our just normal eating routine, and then on the day of, we have whatever we want without feeling guilty about any of it.
Yeah. So that's it. And I mean, you can even incorporate intermittent fasting into December. See how it works for you. You could, and it's one of those tools that could be very handy during a time when your eating patterns are up and down a little bit. So you can incorporate it, but remember, it's a tool. It's not a form of punishment. It's not a form of massive calorie deprivation or anything like that. It's a strategy that you can use that can potentially help improve your digestion because you're clearing all the food out of your system. It can help your cognitive function because you have more blood going to your brain, less to your gut, and it could potentially help with your fat loss as well. So
yep. So that's it for tonight. We're a few minutes over. And again, you can use the link up here, hormones.bayleybodylive.com. There's a free hormone audit that is online that we've created. You can fill it out online, and then we will give you a blueprint based on your specific symptoms, just anything that you're dealing with. And, we even ask questions about medications that you're taking, and, symptoms that you're having, and lifestyle things that are going on with you. So we take all that into account. We'll give you a blueprint on that, and then we'll also be happy to schedule a complimentary phone call to review that with you. So take advantage of that, hormones.bayleybodylive.com.
And we'll be back next week.
Yes, y'all have a happy Thanksgiving. We'll see you next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Same time, same place. Bye.